There are sounds you learn to ignore: the creak of your house settling, wind through a gap in the siding, the hum of a refrigerator you've stopped hearing after 20 years. And then there are sounds that make you stop what you're doing and go find out where they're coming from. High-pitched, rhythmic, coming from a place that's been silent for 2 decades. Samuel Webb heard a whistle coming from the well. Not wind, not an animal, a whistle. Clear enough that his daughter walked across the yard to confirm it. Clear enough that Samuel, who was 52 and had maintained that well when it was still active, said out loud, "Something's come alive down there." He took a rope and went to look. The rope came back up an hour later. Samuel didn't. When they tried to bring him out, they found the rope had been severed at 40 feet. Clean cut, not frayed. And below that cut, the well didn't end where the family records said it ended. It opened into something else. They sealed it the next week. Wooden platform. Soil piled on top. That was August 1934. The well is still sealed. 90 years. Nobody's opened it since. Before I tell you what the rescue team saw down there, what they heard, what they felt, I need you to understand something about wells in the Ozarks. They were hand-dug, limestone, circular shafts about 3 feet across. You knew how deep they went because you dug them yourself, or your father did, and you kept records. Samuel's family well was documented at 80 feet, constructed in 1889, used for 45 years, dried up around 1914 when they found a shallower spring. By the 1930s, it was just a hole with a wooden cover. Silent, abandoned, until it wasn't. Stone County, Missouri, sits in the north-central Ozarks. Limestone country, the kind of land that doesn't give you much unless you work for it. The Webb family had worked it since 1878, 3 generations by the time Samuel was born in 1882. They'd established the farm when the region was still being surveyed, back when most folks were clustered near the rivers, and a homestead 12 miles from town meant you were on your own for most things. Samuel was the 3rd generation. His grandfather had built the original cabin. His father, David, had expanded the farm to about 40 acres, wheat, some hogs, a vegetable garden big enough to get through winter. And Samuel had inherited the kind of knowledge you don't learn from books. How to read the weather by the color of the sky at dawn, when to plant based on soil temperature, not the calendar. How to maintain a well. The well had been dug in 1889. Samuel would have been 7. Too young to help with the digging, but old enough to remember it. Hand-dug wells were a family undertaking. You'd lower a man down with a bucket and a shovel. He'd fill the bucket. You'd haul it up. Repeat. For weeks. The Webb well went down 80 feet before they hit the water table, deeper than most, but not unusual for that part of the Ozarks where the limestone could be dense and dry for long stretches. The well was circular, about 3 feet in diameter, lined with stacked limestone as they went down to keep the walls from collapsing. At the bottom, cold water seeping through the rock. Good water. It served the family for 25 years. Then, in 1914, David discovered a shallower spring about 200 yards from the house. Easier to access, less labor to haul water. The well was abandoned. By the 1920s, it had dried completely, whether from shifting water tables or regional drought, nobody documented. It became one of those features on the property you walked past and didn't think about. A hole with a wooden cover. Samuel's daughter Martha, who was born in 1910, told county investigators later that she'd never seen water in it, just a dark shaft going down into limestone. By August 1934, the well had been dry and silent for 20 years. This is important context for what happened next, because 1934 was the beginning of the worst drought the region had seen in living memory. The Dust Bowl was ravaging the plains to the west. The Ozarks weren't hit as hard, but Stone County was dry. Creeks that usually ran year-round had stopped. Springs were reduced to trickles. And for a farming family 12 miles from town, water wasn't a convenience. It was survival. Samuel was 52 that summer. He'd been farming the land for 30 years by then. He had 2 children, Martha, 24, and Thomas, who was working a timber crew in Arkansas. His wife had died in 1929. His father, David, was 79 and still living on the property in the original cabin. Samuel's hands were the hands of someone who'd spent his life working limestone soil, thick calluses, scars across the knuckles from tools and wire. A crooked index finger on his left hand that had healed wrong after being crushed between 2 fence posts in 1921. He was not an impulsive man. Martha described him to investigators as cautious, deliberate, the kind of person who thought through a decision before making it, which makes what happened on August 14th harder to explain in some ways, and clearer in others. Because when Samuel heard the whistle coming from the well, he didn't ignore it. He didn't dismiss it as wind or imagination. He stopped what he was doing, walked over to the well, listened, and decided it was worth investigating. In the middle of a drought, the possibility of a new water source wasn't just interesting, it was valuable. Worth the risk of descending into an 80-foot shaft that hadn't been maintained in 20 years. That's the context. A dry summer. a family that needed water, and a sound coming from a place that had been silent for 2 decades. Martha Webb was in the house when she heard it. She told the Stone County sheriff a week later that it started around noon, high-pitched, rhythmic. Not continuous. It would sound for a few seconds. Stop, then start again. She described it as like someone calling. Not a word she could make out, but a pattern that felt intentional. She walked outside to locate the source. The well was about 60 yards from the house, near the edge of the tree line. As she got closer, the sound became clearer. It was coming from below the wooden cover. She called for her father. Samuel came out from the barn. Martha pointed to the well. They stood there together, listening. The whistle would sound for 3 or 4 seconds, then stop for about 10 seconds, then sound again. Samuel lifted the edge of the wooden cover. It was heavy, required both hands, and the sound became sharper, definitely coming from the shaft. According to Martha's account, Samuel said, "Something's come alive down there. Might be a new spring." He was thinking about water. That makes sense. Underground aquifers shift. Drought conditions can alter pressure in limestone formations. It's possible that water moving through passages below could create acoustic phenomena, wind through a narrow gap, pressure releasing through a fissure. Samuel would have known this. He'd lived his entire life on land where water came from underground. Martha asked if he was going to go down and look. Samuel said yes. He went to the barn and came back with a rope. Hemp rope, about 50 feet long. It had been used for hauling timber and was frayed in places, but still serviceable. Not ideal for supporting a man's weight at depth. But Samuel had descended into the well before. Back when it was active, he'd gone down to clear debris from the water source. He knew the shaft. He knew the limestone lining. He wasn't going in blind. Martha asked if he wanted help. Samuel said no. It was early afternoon, plenty of daylight. If he wasn't back in an hour, she should get his father. He tied the rope to a post near the well opening, tested the knot, and descended. Martha watched him go down. She said later that she could see him for the first 20 feet or so. The shaft was narrow, but the daylight reached that far. Below 20 feet, it was dark. She heard the sound of his boots scraping against limestone. Then silence. She waited. An hour passed. She called down into the well. No response. She called again. Still nothing. She went to get David. David Webb was 79. He dug that well with his own hands. 45 years earlier. He knew every foot of it. When Martha told him Samuel had gone down and hadn't come back, David's first response, according to what he told neighbors later, was the rope wasn't long enough. They went back to the well together. David called down. No response. He pulled on the rope. It came up easily. Too easily. At 40 feet, the rope ended. Clean cut. Not frayed. Not worn through. Cut. David stood there holding the severed end of the rope. Martha asked what it meant. David said, he went deeper than the rope. But the well was only 80 feet. The rope was 50 feet, tied at the surface. If Samuel had descended to the bottom, the rope would have reached him with 10 feet to spare, unless he'd gone past 80 feet, unless the well went deeper than the family records documented. David and Martha called for help. The nearest neighbor was Henry Caldwell, who lived about 2 miles east. Caldwell arrived around dusk with another rope, longer, better condition, 80 feet of new hemp. The 3 of them stood at the well. Caldwell was 58, a timberman with experience in rope work and confined spaces. He agreed to go down and see what he could find. Caldwell descended with a lantern. David and Martha held the rope at the surface. Caldwell called up as he went down. 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet. At 40 feet, he reached the point where Samuel's rope had been severed. He examined it with the lantern, called up, clean cut, like it was sliced. He continued descending. At 50 feet, the shaft is widening. At 60 feet, it's not a well anymore, it's a chamber. He stopped descending, called up, I'm coming back. When he reached the surface, Caldwell was pale. David asked what he'd seen. Caldwell said, the well opens below. At 60 feet, the walls pull back. It becomes a room. I could see the floor of the shaft. It's not at 80 feet. It drops further. I don't know how far. And the temperature, it's warmer down there. Not cooler like it should be. Warmer. David asked about the whistle. Caldwell said, it's louder with depth, and it's not wind. It's deliberate, a pattern. Someone would whistle, then stop, then whistle again. I couldn't see what was making it, but it's coming from below the chamber. Martha asked if he'd seen Samuel. Caldwell shook his head. If he went past 60 feet, I don't know where he is. That chamber, something about it isn't right. They decided to try again the next morning with more light and better equipment. August 15th, David, Martha, Caldwell, and 2 other neighbors returned to the well. They brought 2 lanterns and 100 feet of rope. Caldwell descended again, this time with instructions to go as deep as the rope allowed. He reached 60 feet and entered the chamber. From the surface, they could hear him calling out descriptions. The chamber is maybe 20 feet across. The floor of the shaft continues down through the center. There's no water, no sign of Samuel. The walls are smooth, not like worked stone, but not natural either. The temperature is definitely warmer. I'm sweating. At 70 feet, the shaft narrows again. I can barely fit through. The whistle is very loud now. It's coming from below. Not from the walls. From below? At 80 feet. I'm at what should be the bottom, but it's not the bottom. The shaft continues. I can feel air moving up. Warm air. Caldwell stopped. Called up. I'm not going further. This doesn't make sense. The well should end here. It doesn't. And whatever's making that sound, it knows I'm here. David asked what he meant. Caldwell said, "The whistle changed when I reached 80 feet. It became faster, like it was responding." Caldwell ascended. When he reached the surface, he refused to go back down. He told David, "Something below is not natural. I don't know what it is. But Samuel went into it. If he's still down there, we can't reach him. Not without equipment we don't have." David stood at the well for a long time. Then he said, "I'm going down." Martha tried to stop him. David was 79 years old. Caldwell was younger and had refused to continue. But David said, "I dug that well. If it goes deeper than 80 feet, I need to see it." He descended. At 40 feet, he called up, "I see the cut. It's clean, not worn, not rubbed. Cut." At 60 feet. I'm in the chamber. It's as Henry described. The walls are smooth. The temperature is noticeably warmer. I can hear the whistle. It's rhythmic, deliberate. At 80 feet, the shaft continues. I can see it dropping into darkness. The whistle is very loud. It's not a natural sound. It's structured, intentional, like someone trying to communicate. He stopped. Silence from below. Then, "I'm coming back up." When David reached the surface, Martha asked if he'd seen Samuel. David said no. She asked if he was going to keep looking. David said no. Why not? David looked at the well. Then he looked at Martha. And he said something that was recorded in the county sheriff's report a day later. He said, "Whatever called Samuel down there, he went. We can't follow. The well should be sealed." August 16th. The Stone County sheriff arrived. His name was Robert Maines. He'd been sheriff for 6 years and had dealt with missing persons before, hunters lost in the woods, children wandering off, occasional drownings in the rivers, but he'd never dealt with someone disappearing into a well that appeared to be deeper than its documented depth. Sheriff Maines examined the rope. He confirmed Caldwell's and David's observations, clean cut at 40 feet. He descended into the well himself, reaching the 60-foot chamber. His report, filed with the county clerk's office on August 17th, states, "The well documented at 80 feet depth continues beyond documented termination point. Chamber formation at 60 feet shows smooth walls inconsistent with hand-dug construction. Temperature increases with depth, contrary to expected cooling. Acoustic phenomenon, whistling sound, originates from below 80-foot depth. Source unknown. Rope severance at 40-foot depth shows clean edge, mechanism unknown. Rescue of Samuel Webb deemed impossible without specialized equipment not available in this county. Recommend cessation of rescue attempts." The sheriff's report is 3 pages long. It's available in the Stone County archives. The language is matter-of-fact. It describes what was observed without attempting to explain it. The only moment where the tone shifts is at the end, where Sheriff Maines wrote, "The family's decision to seal the well is understood and supported by this office." August 17th through 20th. David and Martha made 3 more attempts to reach Samuel. Each time they descended to 80 feet and confirmed. The shaft continued into darkness below. The whistle continued. The temperature remained warm. No sign of Samuel. No response to calls. On August 20th, David told Martha they were stopping. He said Samuel was gone. Whether he'd fallen into the chamber beyond 80 feet, or descended deliberately, or something else had happened, they couldn't reach him, and the well needed to be sealed. Martha asked why seal it? Why not leave it open in case Samuel found a way back? David said. Because whatever's down there, it called him. It knew what it was doing. The whistle was not natural. Samuel understood that. He went anyway. We don't need to know why. We need to make sure nobody else goes down. August 21st, 1934. David Webb, Henry Caldwell, and 3 neighbors sealed the well. They built a wooden platform over the opening and piled soil on top, heavy enough that it would take deliberate effort to remove. David marked the location with a stone cairn, a small pile of rocks to show where the well had been. The local newspaper, the Stone County Tribune, ran a single article on August 20th. Local farmer missing in well incident, search abandoned. The article was 4 paragraphs. It stated that Samuel Webb had descended into the family well to investigate a possible water source and had not returned. Rescue attempts had been made but were unsuccessful. The well had been sealed at the family's request. No mention of the chamber below 80 feet. No mention of the temperature increase. No mention of the whistle. No mention of the rope being cut. The article did not generate follow-up coverage. No regional newspapers picked it up. No geological survey was conducted. No official investigation beyond Sheriff Maine's initial report. The Webb family did not speak publicly about the incident again. When neighbors asked what had happened to Samuel, David would say, "He went into the well and didn't come back. It's sealed now." If pressed for details, he would say, "There's nothing more to say." Martha moved away from Stone County in 1936. David continued farming the land until his death in 1941. The property passed to Samuel's son Thomas, who had been working in Arkansas at the time of the disappearance. Thomas farmed it until 1958, then sold it to a family from Springfield. The well remained sealed. In 1995, a local historian photographed the property as part of a county heritage project. The photograph shows the stone cairn, the wooden platform, weathered but intact. Soil settled over 90 years into a low mound. The caption in the county archives reads, "Webb Family Well, sealed 1934. The current property owner, a descendant of the family that purchased the land in 1958, was contacted by a researcher in 2018 about the well. The owner confirmed that the well remains sealed and stated, "Family wishes the well to remain sealed. No plans to open it." 90 years. Here's what the documented evidence shows. Samuel Webb descended into a family well on August 14, 1934. The well was documented at 80 feet deep. Samuel's rope was 50 feet long. When rescue attempts began, the rope was found severed at 40 feet. Multiple witnesses, Henry Caldwell, David Webb, Sheriff Robert Maines, descended to 60 feet and documented a chamber formation below that depth. All three reported that the well continued beyond 80 feet. All three reported a temperature increase with depth. All three reported a rhythmic whistling sound coming from below 80 feet. Those are the facts documented in county records, witness statements, and the sheriff's report. Here's what the evidence doesn't explain. What created the chamber below 60 feet if the well was hand-dug to 80 feet in 1889 and showed no signs of structural instability for 45 years? What generated the whistle, and why did it follow a deliberate pattern? What cut the rope cleanly at 40 feet? Why did the temperature increase with depth instead of cooling as expected in a sealed limestone shaft? And where is Samuel's body if he descended beyond 80 feet into a chamber that multiple rescue attempts failed to access? There are several ways to interpret this evidence. Interpretation 1. Underground water source reactivation. The 1934 drought could have altered groundwater pressure in the limestone aquifer below the Webb property. Shifting water tables might have opened passages that had been sealed or dry for decades. Water moving through narrow limestone fissures can create high-pitched sounds. Not quite a whistle, but close. Samuel, hearing this and knowing the value of a new water source during a drought, descended to investigate. The rope could have been severed by friction against a sharp edge in the limestone, a projection or ridge that Samuel maneuvered around on his way down. At 40 feet, the rope made contact with the edge, wore through, and separated. Samuel, now committed to the descent, continued without the rope. He reached the chamber at 60 feet, descended further, and either fell into a water-filled passage or became lost in a system of connected chambers. His body remains in those passages, beyond the reach of rope-based rescue attempts. The temperature increase would be explained by geothermal activity or water from deeper sources carrying heat upward. The chamber formation would be natural. Water erosion over geological time creating voids in the limestone that the original well diggers in 1889 didn't reach or detect. This interpretation fits most of the physical evidence. It requires no unusual mechanisms. It explains why the well appeared to continue beyond documented depth, because it did, into natural formations the family had never explored. The problem with this interpretation: the witnesses described the whistle as deliberate, patterned, rhythmic. Caldwell said it changed when I reached 80 feet, like it was responding. Water moving through rock doesn't respond to human presence. It doesn't accelerate or alter pattern. And the clean severance of the rope. Multiple witnesses described it as a cut, not wear or fraying. Friction doesn't produce clean cuts. Interpretation 2. Concealed chamber system. It's possible that when the well was dug in 1889, the original diggers reached 80 feet and stopped, not because they hit the water table, but because they encountered something else, a chamber, a passage, something they chose not to document. They sealed it off, perhaps with a wooden platform or stones, and reported the well as complete at 80 feet. 45 years later, in 1934, that seal failed. Drought conditions, shifting earth, natural decay of wood, whatever mechanism held the chamber sealed gave way. The whistle was air escaping from the newly opened passage. Samuel descended to investigate and discovered the concealed chamber. He cut the rope himself at 40 feet, deliberately, to ensure he could continue descending without being pulled back. He entered the chamber system, which connected to passages extending beyond the property. He either became lost in those passages or exited the system elsewhere. The temperature increase and chamber formation are explained by the existence of a larger cave system below the well. The clean rope cut is explained by Samuel's deliberate action. The family's decision to seal the well immediately becomes understandable. They were concealing the existence of the chamber system, either to protect family secrets or to prevent investigation into why the original well diggers had hidden it. This interpretation explains Samuel's willingness to descend despite obvious danger. If he understood the rope, severance was his own action and not an accident, his continued descent makes sense. It also explains the family's refusal to allow further investigation and their insistence on sealing the well. The problem: this requires assuming deliberate concealment by the original well diggers and by Samuel's father David, who had helped dig the well. It requires assuming Samuel severed the rope himself, which no witness suggested. And it still doesn't explain the description of the whistle as responding to human presence. Interpretation. 3. Something in the chamber. The witnesses were consistent. The whistle sounded deliberate, patterned, responsive. Caldwell said it changed when he reached 80 feet. David said it was trying to communicate. If we take those descriptions seriously, if we don't explain them away as subjective interpretation or stress response, then we're left with the possibility that something in the chamber was making the sound, intentionally, and that Samuel heard it, understood it as communication, and responded by descending. The rope severance becomes an action taken by whatever was in the chamber to prevent Samuel from being pulled back. The temperature increase suggests a living presence or energy source. The chamber formation is exactly what it appeared to be, a space that existed below the documented well depth, occupied by something that could make sound, respond to human presence, and act on physical objects like rope. Samuel's body wasn't recovered because it wasn't left where rescue teams could reach it. It was taken, or moved, or hidden by whatever called him down. This interpretation has no mechanism. It doesn't explain what could exist in a sealed limestone chamber, generate patterned sounds, cut rope, and remove a body. But it's the interpretation that fits what the witnesses actually said they experienced, rather than reinterpreting their words to fit explanations that don't invoke unknowable causes. Interpretation. 4. Perceptual failure. Under stress. All of the witnesses were under extreme stress. David Webb had just lost his son. Martha had lost her father. Caldwell and Sheriff Maines were attempting rescues in dangerous conditions: confined spaces, darkness, rope work at depth. Under those conditions, perception becomes unreliable. The whistle might have been wind moving through the well shaft, natural, acoustic, but interpreted as patterned because humans find patterns in noise. The chamber at 60 feet might have been a widening of the shaft that appeared more dramatic in lamplight than it actually was. The temperature increase might have been subjective, anxiety and physical exertion raising body temperature, interpreted as environmental warmth. The clean-cut rope might have worn through at a weak point and separated in a way that appeared deliberate but wasn't. Samuel descended with inadequate rope, fell when it ran out, and died at the bottom of an 80-foot well. Rescue teams, operating at the limits of their equipment, couldn't reach the bottom and interpreted the shaft as deeper than it was. The family sealed the well out of grief, guilt, and a desire to prevent further tragedy. This interpretation is psychologically plausible. Stress, darkness, confined spaces, and fear produce perceptual distortions. Every part of the story could be explained as a combination of normal well construction, rope failure, and human beings making sense of sensory input under conditions that made accuracy difficult. The problem? Sheriff Maines was not a family member. He had no emotional investment. His report is clinical, detailed, and explicit. The well continues beyond 80 feet. The chamber exists. The temperature increase was measured, not felt. He was a trained investigator documenting observations. If this interpretation is correct, we have to assume his report is unreliable, which undermines the primary documentary evidence we have. Interpretation. 5. Geological anomaly. With acoustic amplification. Limestone formations in the Ozarks are riddled with caves, sinkholes, and underground streams. It's possible the Webb well intersected with a larger cave system that wasn't mapped. The 1934 drought altered water flow through that system, creating unusual acoustic conditions. Air moving through passages, creating sounds that resonated in ways that mimicked deliberate patterns. Samuel descended to investigate. At 40 feet, the rope caught on a sharp limestone projection and separated cleanly. Samuel, committed to the descent and curious about the sound source, continued. He reached the intersection with the cave system at 60 feet and descended further, either falling or climbing into passages that extended beyond the vertical shaft. He became lost in those passages. His body remains there, in chambers that the rescue teams couldn't access with the equipment they had. The chamber formation, temperature increase, and whistle are all explained by natural cave systems. The rope severance is explained by geological features. Samuel's disappearance is explained by cave exploration gone wrong, a tragic accident in an environment he didn't understand as well as he thought he did. This interpretation requires the least speculation. Caves exist in the Ozarks. Acoustic phenomena in caves are documented. Rope can catch on sharp rock. People die in cave systems. The problem: if the well intersected a cave system large enough to allow Samuel to climb into passages and become lost, that system would have been detectable during the original well construction in 1889. Cave passages large enough for human entry create voids in the rock above them. Diggers would have felt the instability or broken through into the passage. And Sheriff Mains's report explicitly describes the temperature increase in continuing shaft, not a side passage or cave entrance, but a vertical continuation of the well itself. None of these interpretations is conclusive. Each fits some of the evidence. Each has problems with other parts of the evidence. That's not a failure of analysis. That's the truth of what we're working with. Documented observations that allow multiple readings, none of which can be proven from the records that survived. Samuel Webb was 52 years old when he heard the whistle. He'd lived on that land his entire life. He knew the well, had helped maintain it when it was active, had walked past it for 20 years after it dried up. When he heard a sound coming from a place that had been silent, he didn't dismiss it. He investigated. That's the part I keep returning to, not the chamber, not the temperature, not the rope. The fact that Samuel chose to descend. Henry Caldwell went down that well and stopped at 60 feet because something about it felt wrong. David Webb went down and stopped at 80 feet because he recognized that whatever was below had called his son and that following wasn't possible. Sheriff Mains went down, documented what he saw, and recommended abandoning rescue. All three men reached a point where they said, "This is as far as I can go." Samuel went further. We don't know what he thought when he heard the whistle. We don't know if he recognized it as something other than water or wind. We don't know if he understood the danger and descended anyway, or if he believed it was safe and was wrong. What we know is that he heard a sound, identified its source as the well, and decided it was worth investigating even though the well had been dry and sealed for 20 years. And when the rope ran out at 40 feet, whether it was cut or worn or severed by his own hand, he kept going. David Webb told Martha that whatever called Samuel down there knew what it was doing. I don't know if David believed that literally, that something intelligent had generated the whistle as a deliberate call, or if he meant it the way you might say that a river knows where it's going, a way of attributing intention to a force that has none. But David dug that well. He knew limestone, he knew water, he knew construction, and after descending to 80 feet and hearing what was below, he chose the word called, not attracted, not lured. The called. The well remains sealed. I contacted the current property owner in 2023 while researching this. They confirmed that the seal is still in place, wooden platform, soil mound, stone cairn. They also confirmed that the family has no intention of opening it. When I asked why, they said, "It's been sealed for 90 years. Whatever reason the Webb family had for sealing it, we respect that decision." 90 years is a long time to maintain a seal on a hole in the ground. Long enough that everyone who witnessed the original event has died. Long enough that the property has changed hands twice. Long enough that memory fades into family story, and family story fades into local legend, and local legend becomes a footnote in county archives. But the seal remains. In 2019, a geologist from the University of Missouri reviewed Sheriff Mains's report at my request. I asked if the described phenomena, chamber formation below documented well depth, temperature increase, acoustic anomaly, were consistent with known cave systems in the Ozarks. The geologist said yes, with caveats. Cave systems exist. Acoustic phenomena occur. Temperature variations happen. But the described geometry, a vertical shaft continuing beyond its constructed depth rather than intersecting with a horizontal passage, is unusual, not impossible, just unusual. I asked if it would be possible to investigate the site with modern equipment, ground-penetrating radar, sonar, thermal imaging. The geologist said yes, technically, but it would require removing the seal, and whoever owns the property would need to consent, which they haven't. So we're left with what we have. A sheriff's report from 1934 that documents observations without explaining them. Witness statements from 3 separate individuals describing the same phenomena. Chamber, temperature, whistle, continuation of shaft. A family decision to seal the well immediately and permanently. And 90 years of silence. There are wells all over the Ozarks, hundreds of them. Most were dug in the late 1800s and abandoned when rural electrification made it possible to pump water from shallower sources. A lot of them are still there, sealed or open, marked or forgotten. If you drive the back roads of Stone County, you'll pass properties where old wells sit in overgrown fields, wooden covers rotted away, shafts open to the sky. None of them are sealed the way the Webb well is sealed. None of them have cairns marking their location. None of them have family instructions passed down through generations to leave them closed. I think about that sometimes, about what it means when a family seals something and then makes sure it stays sealed. Not temporarily, not until it's safe, permanently. David Webb said the well should be sealed, not covered. Sealed, as though the distinction mattered. As though a cover could be removed if you needed to access the well again, but a seal was meant to last. It has. Before you go, I want to hear from you. What do you make of this? Do you read it as geological anomaly, cave system, acoustic phenomenon, tragic accident? Do you read it as something that can't be explained by geology? Do you think Samuel understood what he was descending into, or do you think he believed it was water and was wrong? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where people land on this one. If you're new here, this is what we do. We look at documented incidents that don't resolve cleanly, things that were investigated, recorded, and then left alone because nobody could explain them, and pursuing explanation seemed less important than sealing the site and moving on. The Ozarks have a lot of these stories. So do the Appalachians, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, rural Maine, places where people lived close to the land, where what happened in a well or a hollow or a cave was between you and the land, and you dealt with it the way you thought best. Sometimes that meant sealing a well and not talking about it. This story was compiled from the Stone County Sheriff's Office archives, Sheriff Robert Mains's report, August 16, 1934. County clerk records, Webb family property documentation, well construction records from 1889, the Stone County Tribune, August 20th, 1934 article, and oral histories recorded by Martha Webb's descendants in the 1970s. If you want to verify any of the details, the sheriff's report is accessible at the Stone County Courthouse in Galena, Missouri. They'll pull it for you if you ask. It's filed under Unresolved Missing Persons, 1934. The well is on private property. The current owners have asked that people not visit the site. Respect that. Stay curious. Take care of yourself. And if you ever hear something coming from a place that's been silent for 20 years, maybe stop and think about what Samuel Webb heard and what he chose to do about it before you decide to investigate.